Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 8th ECM. It's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker. His name is Gabriel Perret. Gabriel Perret is a senior researcher at the CNRS, the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, and he is also a professor at École Normale Supérieure in Paris. He works at the interface between applied mathematics, imaging, and machine learning. His research was supported by an ERC starting grant from 2010 to 2015. It was called the Sigma Vision, and is now supported by another ERC grant, a Consolidator one, which is called NORIA. He obtained the Blaise Pascal Prize from the French Academy of Sciences in 2017, the Meilligins Prize from the Italian Mathematical Union in 2019, and he has just received the silver medal from CNRS this year. He's the Deputy Director of the Prairie Institute for Artificial Intelligence, the Director of the Center for Data Science at the École Normale Supérieure, and the former Director of the CNRS Network, Mathematics for Artificial Intelligence. He is the head of ELIS, the European Lab for Learning and Intelligent Systems in Paris. And I would also like to mention that Gabriel is very engaged in reproducible research and code education, in particular through the platform www.numerical-tools.com. I recall that you can ask a question either using the question answer tool or by raising your hand. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. So thanks, Jean-Stéphane. Can you see my slides correctly? Just to check that everything is fine and let me know
yes.
if there's any problem.
Can you change it? Go to the next. Yes, it's okay.
Switching. Okay, great. Okay, let's start. So yeah, I wanted to take this opportunity to do some kind of a mini tutorial on this topic, which is optimal transport, rather from a computational perspective, which is my field of research, and explain the interplay with machine learning, so high dimensional computation, and explain what are the limits and how can we go beyond. So it's joint work with a lot of people. In particular, I would like to thank Marco Couturier, who is one of the driving forces of optimal transport for machine learning, and our collaboration has been very fruitful in this direction. Also, before I start, some shameless advertisement for this little book that I've co-authored with Marco. So if you want to know more, it's free. You can just go online and download the book. And you can also have access to Python codes that implement everything that I would say today. It's very important for me also that the code is working correctly and that you can try it. So please feel free to go online and visit this web page. All right, so a bit of a motivation for the type of problem we'd like to address, which are problems that you can find in many area of science, I would say, ranging from imaging, medical imaging, for instance, up to modern application in machine learning, which have to do to put in correspondence a group of points, and more generally, distribution of probability. Could be, for instance, in image processing, where you'd like to compare the color content of images, view as some kind of a distribution of pixels in the 3D space of color. I spoke about medical imaging. So in medical imaging, it's very important to register together shapes to some common template, and you can use shapes as a clay or distribution of materials that you'd like to compare together. And on the right-hand side of this picture is more high-dimensional problem that you can find in machine learning, either supervised machine learning or unsupervised machine learning, where you could represent the data as a group of points, as a huge collection of points in some possibly very high-dimensional space. So first, application to natural language processing are nowadays very important. And really the revolution now is that you would represent the text and the word that represents inside the text or a group of text as a point in high dimension. So you want to do, for instance, translation of text by modifying collection of points through some Euclidean space, very high dimensional space. So this is for natural language processing, but also for computer vision, you have the same idea of viewing a collection of images as a collection of points, of course, in a very abstract and high dimensional space of images in order to try to model the set of images to then do either synthesis of new images or possibly retrieval of images and many applications that have to do to having a good understanding of the distribution of images. Okay, so this is just the big picture is representing collection of points and trying to compare them together. So in order to formalize it, what are the type of problems we are facing? You could call it density fitting or parameter estimation. You have a template alpha, which is parameterized by some parameter theta, and you want to change the parameter theta so that the templates come as close as possible to the observation beta, which is just a big collection of points. Kind of a universal problem. So it's kind of a template deformation, if you want, possibly in very high dimensional space. And you view this as an optimization problem to minimize some discrepancy, capital D, between your model alpha and your data beta. Okay. And the question I want to address in this talk, which is kind of a universal question, is what should be the capital D, the loss function that you want to use for this typical application. And the key take-home message of optimal transport is in many applications, you already have access to some notion of distance between points. So, which here is denoted as little d. Could be just the Euclidean distance, or could be some geodesic distance, or I mean, the user gives you access to this distance, little d, but it's a distance between pairs of points. And what you want is to lift it automatically, in some sense, to capital D, which is a distance, but now between group of points. Okay, and really optimal transport, if you want to remember only one thing, is that it's an automatic method to do this for you. It takes little d and gives you access to capital D. This is the good news. The bad news is it's quite expensive to compute because it's automatic, but it requires you to solve an optimization problem, another optimization problem. Okay, so one question is, how do you lift this computational bottleneck? How do you accelerate algorithm? And also what's happening in high dimension? Because as you would see, the higher the dimension, the more difficult and the more ill-behaved this lifting becomes. Okay, and I think it's quite interesting. It's a new question for mathematicians to understand what happened in high dimension for optimal transport. Okay. So first, I will explain the basics, the definition of optimal transport, which is basically due to Kantorovich. So I will explain several definitions, but the revolution came through the work of Kantorovich, and then explain how do you somehow simplify it or accelerate it using an approximation method due basically to Schrödinger. Okay, so it's even older. So it's kind of, my talk is like reversing time, and you will see it gets to older and older discovery. But first start by Monge problem, which is of course very old. You just have two sets of points, same number of points, xi and yj, and you want to find a bijection or a permutation in order to make the overall distance as small as possible. So for Monge, it was for military application, the soldiers that wanted to move sands around, but it's kind of a universal matching problems. You want to match over the all possible set of permutation to minimize some notion of distance little. Okay. And Monge asked the question, but was not able to solve it because, of course, it seems intractable if you use a problem like this. There is an exponential number of combinations to test, so it looks like there is no solution. And Monge was not able to crack the problem, and it actually has to wait for almost 200 years for actually someone to crack the problem and find an efficient solution, which is more or less due to Kantorovich. So it's a simple problem to ask, but it's a hard problem to solve because it's posed as a combinatorial optimization problem. Furthermore, there's not more than this. It's not only that it's hard to compute, it's also not very well posed. I mean, you'd like to have some kind of a better formulation. For instance, what happens if you don't have the same number of points? What happens even more complicated if you have a continuous set of points, the density. It doesn't seem obvious to generalize this because posed like this, it seems like you need to have the same number of points. Maybe you also like to have some weight, some notion of importance or probability, which is not taken here into account. So somehow the relaxation of this problem, the natural way to view this, is to move from the notion of point matching to the notion of mass matching, where you want to put a correspondence between weighted points if you want. And now the permutation will be relaxed into a new object that has been introduced by Kantorovich, which is what we are going to see now. So this is the original formulation, but it's not the good one. The one I want you to remember is the one of Kantorovich, which is more general, which is posed over weighted points. So you have xi and yj, but they have weight ai and bj. For the sake of simplicity, assume they sum to 1. It's probability weight. You could generalize this, but for simplicity, let's stick to the settings of matching probabilities. And the genius of Kantorovich, for which he got basically the Nobel Prize in economy, and it was really a notion very important for economy, is now you want to allow yourself to split the mass, and you describe the movement of mass between A and B by a big matrix, a big coupling. So what Kantorovich called also a transport plan in the sense of planification of economy. And you planify the transports by saying each time you transfer some mass from AI to Bj, you put a non-zero element in this matrix Pij. Okay, so Pij describes the movement of mass, it's positive, and it has to satisfy the conservation of mass, which is the fact that the sum on each row should be equal to A, okay, because you want all the mass from the left-hand side to be distributed. And of course, it's symmetric. You also want all the mass to be retrieved on the other side. So the sum on the column should be equal to B, to the vector B. In matrix vector notation, which is convenient, it means that the matrix P times the vector 1, so this sums all the rows, should be equal to A, and P transpose times 1 should be equal to B. And why is it a good news, or I mean a good formulation? It's because this set of coupling now is a convex set. It's actually a big polyhedra, transportation polyhedra, because it's defined by inequalities, and equalities are affine equalities. Now, what does it mean to find the optimal transport, the optimal coupling? It simply means that each time you put some unit amount of mass Pij, you pay a price which is proportional to the distance to some power P. So before, for Monge, it was P equal 1, but you could take any P, basically. And the total cost you pay is just the sum of all these little costs, which means that the function you optimize is a linear function. So you minimize the linear function under affine inequalities. It's also the birth of a modern optimization of linear programming. It's one of the first apparitions of a linear program. And really what makes this immediately immensely popular in industry, it's routinely solved nowadays, it's because at the same time as Kantorovich proposed this formulation for economic planning, there was George Dantzig that proposed an algorithm, which is called the simplex algorithm, which is super efficient to solve this algorithm, to solve this type of problem. So super efficient, okay, with quotes, it means its complexity is polynomial. And in fact, you can show that for this problem, the complexity of this algorithm invented by George Dantzig is roughly cubic time complexity. So you see that with respect to Monge, now we have something that is much more efficient because it's cubic. So depends whether n is large or not, but up to a few thousand points, you can solve this, and it's solved on a routinely basis in industry. Okay, so this is basically the formulation of optimal transports. Now, what can you do with it? You have this coupling. It's good because it gives you a way to transport mass. Maybe you like it and it's useful. But what is even more important, I think, which is really a change of mind, is that the cost itself of the optimal coupling, if you raise it to the power 1 over P, it's defining the so-called Wasserstein distance. So it's a distance, which means it's 0 if and only if the two distributions are equal, which is rather cool. But then you might say, okay, I know a lot of other distance. Why should I compute this very complicated stuff? Maybe I could use a simpler notion of distance. Okay, so this is what I want to stress: is what is exactly this distance about. Let me just say, but I will not insist on this, that everything that I say extends to probabilities, arbitrary probabilities, could be with norcities, for instance. You simply have to replace the sum by integrals, and voila, it works. So really, this theory has nothing specific with discrete setup. Simply on a computer, of course, you need to discretize at some point. But the theory is working for arbitrary distribution. Now we have this distance. What is the topology associated to the distance? What does it mean for two sequences of distribution to converge one to the other? And the topology associated to the Wasserstein distance, it's what probabilists, if you're at least on a compact domain, would call the convergence in law. So it's a very, very useful and important notion of convergence, which is basically the convergence you use when you state the central limit theorem. Central limit theorem is a convergence of the distribution. It's not really a convergence of the random variable. So this notion of convergence, what analysts would call weak convergence, weak star convergence, is convergence of the distribution, but viewed through the prism of continuous function. It means that all possible expectation, all possible integral should converge. So it's kind of a weak notion of convergence. And maybe a nice way to understand what's happening here is to contrast this with what is often called the strong topology over distribution, which is typically the topology induced by the L1 norm, also known as the total variation norm, which is just the L1 norm of the difference. So in order to really see that it's very, very different, you just look at what happened on 2 Dirac, and for more Dirac, it's even more complicated, but on 2 Dirac, you see clearly the difference, is that the total variation norm between 2 Dirac, you have +1 and +1, so the distance in L1 is 2. So for the strong topology, 2 Dirac never converges one to each other, even if they are super close. But for the Wasserstein distance, since you raise to the power P and then to the power 1 over P, and there is a single way to link 2 Dirac together, the Wasserstein distance between 2 Dirac is equal to the distance itself. It's exactly what I've told you before about Wasserstein or optimal transport being a lifting method between little d and capital D. When you just have single Dirac, it's equal to little d. But of course, it still works if you have more than pairs of Dirac. And it's more or less the only definition that you can find if you want to satisfy exactly this equality. If you put as an axiom that you want the distance between group of points to simplify to the basic distance between pairs of points, you have to use this seemingly complicated Wasserstein distance. Okay, and this is the theorem actually. You can show that you converge in law if and only if you converge for the Wasserstein distance. So the Wasserstein distance is really the canonical way, in some sense, to metrize the convergence in law. If you are studying the central limit theorem and you want to study at which speed does it converge to a Gaussian, you can use the Wasserstein distance. And actually, it's often used. Okay, so this is really why we love it, why we love the Wasserstein distance, is because it's really kind of a horizontal, if you want, notion of distance between probability, as opposed to L1 or total variation, which is really more like a vertical notion of distance between, in some sense, density. So it's very, very different. All right, so now that we know why we want to use it, how do we compute it and what can we do with it? I've told you before, you can use the simplex algorithm. It works fine up to a few thousand points. Even better than this, and this is really a fundamental theorem. It's called the Birkhoff-von theorem. Is if you have two groups of points with exactly the same number of points, actually you can show that Monge is equal to Kantorovich, in the sense that the solution to Kantorovich is actually a permutation matrix. So really this combination of Kantorovich method, Birkhoff-von theorem, which is from the 50s, tell you that really you have solved actually in cubic time the problem of Monge. That was an open problem. It's nice. And we also have more efficient algorithm in this case. The most famous one is the Hungarian algorithm that you can Google and find on Wikipedia. It's a very, very nice algorithm, which has more or less a cubic complexity. There is one case which you might want to know, which is very simple. It's the 1D case. If you're in 1D, optimal transport is actually increasing. It's an increasing map. So the way you can find optimal transport between group of points in 1D is simply by sorting them from left to right, assigning the first point to the first point, etc. So in 1D, but it's only in 1D, the complexity is rather good. It's n log n. Now you have other cases which are specific. I don't want to insist on this, but you have many cases where you could have particular formulas that are nice. One famous one is for the Euclidean distance to the power 1 that you could recompute using vector fields. I will not speak about this, but it's a bit simpler. There is also a very nice connection to partial differential equation through what is called the Monge-Ampère equation. So you also have method based on numerical method for PDEs, which are valid for the case now of the Euclidean distance to the power 2, also related to very nice work of Jean-David Benamou and Yann Brenier that show that also not only you can solve it through the Monge-Ampère equation, but you can also solve it through the computation of a geodesic, minimizing length evolution of probability. So it's also very nice work that you can also discretize using finite elements and so on. And the last thing that I want to just mention to you, if you are interested, is in the specific case still of the Euclidean distance to the power 2. If one of the two distributions is discrete, made of Dirac, then you can compute the optimal transport by computing what are called Voronoi cells, so some kind of a segmentation of the space using a polyhedra. So it's very nice, and you have a very efficient algorithm to do this in 1D, 2D, and 3D. Okay, so in low dimension, it's very efficient. Now, this is not really what we are interested for machine learning, where typically the cost might not be as simple as this. And also, one thing that I think is more important is all these methods, they solve for you the optimal transport to very high accuracy, sometimes even with 0 error, which is not really what you're interested in practice. In practice, you are perfectly fine, at least for machine learning application, to have a huge error because the data is very noisy, you are in high dimension. But what you want is an algorithm that is, I would say, at most n square. Okay, n square would be acceptable. N cube is already too much, and this is not what this algorithm do. So okay, so we'd like something different, and for this we'll make a detour through statistical physics, through the problem that is called Schrödinger problem. Okay, which was somehow invented by Schrödinger before optimal transport. He didn't know there was any connection with the problem of transportation. But you can view this, if you know about Kantorovich problem that I've told you before, as simply a penalization. So for those who do optimization, it's a very natural penalization by simply adding epsilon time the entropy or minus the entropy of your coupling. So, and when I say entropy, it's the classical Shannon-Boltzmann entropy. So you take the usual optimal transport problem and you add epsilon Pij log of Pij. So what this entropy does, if you think about this from an optimization perspective, is it put like a barrier to force capital P to be strictly positive, basically because the derivative of the entropy is a logarithm, so it will force the solution to be strictly positive. So it's something very well known in probability, also when you do a maximum entropy method. It's typically what people would call a maximum entropy method applied to this particular problem of Schrödinger. But what does it give intuitively? I mean, to get some intuition, and you can get this intuition from Schrödinger problem itself, which was statistical mechanic problem where you say, okay, we view molecules of gas at two different times, and we want to infer the most likely trajectory between particles of gas. But of course, particles of gas, they are not deterministic. They don't move in straight lines, so they move according to some Brownian motion. So one particle would actually be linked to several particles because there is randomness. You don't know exactly where it will end. So really, you could also think about epsilon as being a temperature that would make things more blurry, more fuzzy. And here on the left, you see what happens when epsilon is 0. So when epsilon is 0, you retrieve the classical optimal transport solution, which by Birkhoff-Randemann is just a permutation. So it's very sparse. And as epsilon increases, capital P become larger and larger, more and more dense. And here I display a little segment on the display. Each time there is one Pij that is larger than the threshold, let's say 10 to the minus 3. And you see as epsilon increases from left to right, you have more and more connections. So the solution is less and less sparse. You connect more and more people together. And this would be important for two things, really very, very important for the intuition why we do this. First of all, as epsilon increases, the solution would be easier to compute and the algorithm will be faster. And you can use this from an optimization perspective. The problem becomes more convex, more strictly convex, so simpler to solve. And the algorithm will go much, much faster. And also, since you have more link together between the two particles, it will be more stable in a high dimension. So it would be better for machine learning in high dimension. And this I would explain through the theorem later. Now, this is, for those who like algorithm, this is the most important slide. For those who don't really care about algorithm, well, it's not super important, but it's still a very beautiful result that is due to Sinkhorn. And this idea is actually very old. This algorithm is much older, actually, even than Schrödinger itself. It was used by statisticians, if you want, with no computer, just by pencil, trying to solve this problem by doing the computation directly on small instances. And the remark is that if you write down the optimality condition for this problem, so there are two constraints, conservation of mass, you would introduce two Lagrange multipliers for the conservation of mass constraints, meaning that your solution to the problem, if and only if, first you satisfy the constraints, and also you can be written in an exponential way. It's a usual format for maximum entropy method, meaning that there is two Lagrange multipliers U and V, which are strictly positive scalars, set of scalars, that multiply the rows and the columns. So you multiply the rows by U and the column by V, and you ask yourself, is it true that the scaled matrix has a given sum of the row and the column? So if for simplicity, you take uniform distribution A and uniform distribution B, it means can you scale the rows and the column of a matrix so that it becomes bistochastic? Okay, and this question of scaling a matrix toward bistochasticity is actually very old and very well known. And this is just basically answering this question through optimization. Because Schrödinger problem is strictly convex, the answer is yes, you can always, and you can only do this in a unique way. There is a unique solution to this problem. Okay, so it's almost obvious from the optimality condition. Okay, so another question is, okay, it exists, but how do you compute it? And the way to see this is simply by writing down the conservation of mass constraints in this exponential way of writing the coupling. So the coupling P is rewritten as diagonal of U. So you multiply U on the left by a diagonal matrix. You multiply K on the left by a diagonal matrix. Now I see that I forgot to tell you what is capital K, the thing that is in the middle. Capital K is the Gibbs kernel. I should have told you this before. Capital K is the Gibbs kernel. What is the Gibbs kernel associated to the problem here is simply exponential of minus the cost divided by epsilon. Okay, so if you think about optimal transport in Euclidean space, capital K is just a big Gaussian matrix. Okay, so here you want to scale a Gaussian matrix so that it has sum of rows equal to A and sum of column equal to B. So you write P in this format, in this bit weird format, diag of U times K times diag of V. Okay, and now you multiply on the right by 1 to be able to sum the rows on the column. Okay, and if you do this, so it's a very simple exercise, you obtain that basically two equations, the conservation of mass equation. The first one is U multiplied by KV is equal to A. Okay, and here when I say multiply, dot with a little circle is just like pointwise multiplication of two vectors. Take two vectors and you multiply each entry together. But when I write K times V, it's really the matrix K multiplied by the vector V. So you get U times KV, which should be A, and then you should get the same equation, but with the role of U and V, which are reversed. So solving Schrödinger problem, once you have wrote the equation, is equivalent to solving two equations in two unknown, and these equations are two polynomial of degree 2 in U and V. So solving optimal transport somehow reduces to solving two equations of degree 2, which looks obvious, but well, it's not obvious because they are linked together, these two equations. But the way to solve it, which is quite natural, is to first solve the first equation. How do you do this? If you give me little v, I can compute U simply by a division. I divide A by K times V. So it's very simple, and it solves the first equation. But now I need to solve the second equation. I do the same. This time I exchange the role of U and V. And then it's like a chicken and egg problem or a fixed point problem where you iterate between the two. And this is the Synchron algorithm. So the Synchron algorithm is a simple two equation that you can implement very easily. So in Python, it's something that is very easy and very fun to code because it's simple and it works fairly well. And the theorem due to Synchron in 64 is that this actually converges. And Synchron showed that this fixed point is actually contractant for some metric, so-called the Hilbert metric. And you can then show the convergence with the rates to the solution. Why is it so nice? I mean, you could maybe cook up other algorithm. Why this particular algorithm is very nice? It's very nice because its complexity, basically, it's quadratic, it's n squared. Because the only bottleneck is the multiplication of a matrix times a vector, which is roughly, basically n squared. So it's an algorithm that costs n squared times the number of iterations. And of course, the number of iterations depend on epsilon. If epsilon is very small, then you need to do more iterations. It's exactly what I've told you before, that this is a very efficient method if you don't want to have a precision that is too small, too precise. Okay. Now, the other advantage is computing product with matrices is very efficiently done on GPUs, graphical processing units, which is the hardware that is used to train a neural network. This is why this algorithm was immediately immensely popular in machine learning, basically because they used a lot of GPUs, and using Synchron on GPU is also very natural. So it's an algorithm that streams very well on graphical processing unit, and this was really the contribution of Marco Cuturi to basically explain this to people working in the field of machine learning, that this is a very cool way to compute optimal transforms on GPUs. Okay, so stop of the advertisement for this algorithm, but as you can see, I'm very excited by this type of method, which works extremely well on GPUs. Some extensions, so I will just mention this and do some name dropping. Basically, the name of Guillaume and Marshall here that extended all these ideas to not only compare two distributions, but to compare families of distributions by computing some barycenter. And the barycenter is found by minimizing a sum of a search time distance. And okay, I will spare you the details because it's not really important for my talk, but it turns out that you can also compute this notion of barycenter using Synchron algorithm. You can extend Synchron algorithm to now compute barycenter of probability distribution. There's many ways, many problems where it's useful to actually be able to average, in some sense, a probability distribution. And this is just a simple illustration to average shapes. If you use a shape as a uniform distribution, you could somehow average the shapes by running this type of Synchron algorithm. And we did this with Guillaume. Now I would like to enter more into the high dimensional setup in order to have time at the end to present to you some application to machine learning. The first things, if we want to go to high dimension, is to see what is the impact, if you want, of the entropy on the optimal transport and on the Wasserstein distance. And the answer is that, unfortunately, it's actually rather bad because this entropy will introduce a bias. And if you compute now Schrödinger problem between alpha and itself, So for optimal transport, the solution would be 0. You would find the distance which is 0. But here, because of the presence of the entropy, you find something that is strictly positive, because you need to diffuse a little bit because of the fuzziness of the problem. And what is even worse is if you look at what is the closest distribution to yourself, what is the beta, which is the closest possible to alpha according to Schrödinger costs, it's not alpha, and it's something here which is somehow shrunk inside. So if you let the epsilon larger and larger, somehow you would see that the optimal fit becomes smaller and smaller and actually converges toward the barycenter. So this is the bad news. It tells you that the entropy creates a bias, which might not be good if epsilon is very large. Okay, it looks like a detail, but in practice, it's a huge error that you make. Okay, so now the question is, could you somehow solve this problem or reduce these issues? Which is what we have been working, for instance, with Aude Genvet, which was the PhD thesis of Aude, to understand this type of problem and make the mathematical analysis and also propose a solution. And we find that the very simple way to solve this is a simple trick, some kind of a polarization formula, if you want, is to simply subtract half to the cost, to the Schrödinger cost, the value of Schrödinger problem, half of the value between alpha and itself and half of the value between beta and itself. So somehow now, well, this is 0 if alpha is beta by construction. And initially it looks like, okay, it should not work, right? There is minus sign, so maybe you introduce something even worse, could maybe become negative, which could be even worse. And we simply tried it on instances, computed numerically this value, and we found that it was working great. It was always positive. So we started in wondering whether there was some deeper things behind this very simple formula. And the first thing you can look at, which is the first step, is to look at what are the asymptotic when the temperature goes to 0 and when the temperature goes to plus infinity. So when the temperature goes to 0, this has been actually studied in details in the large deviation, for instance, community. And we also wrote a paper with Guillaume to really understand at which speed you go to the unregularized optimal transport. And then also Christian Leonard wrote several papers on this. So the rationale is you converge, and you converge rather fast actually to the optimal transport. So this is to be expected. Now in the large temperature limit, what is nice is you also converge to something that you can compute, which is simply an Euclidean distance. So in instance, when the temperature goes to plus infinity, you converge toward the Euclidean distance between probability distribution, which raises the question, what are Euclidean distance between probability distribution? It cannot be just the L2 norm, because L2 doesn't exist between Diracs. So it's kind of a kernelized, if you want, L2 norm. It's called the kernel norms, or a maximum mean discrepancy in statistics, where you pick your favorite kernels of two variables, and you integrate twice this kernel on the difference. So you can do this if you want as an inner product between probability distribution. And what is the kernel here that appears in the limit of Schrödinger problem? The kernel is simply minus the distance to the power p, so it's minus the cost. Which raises the question, when is it the case that minus the cost to the power p defines a proper norm? It might look a bit weird because there is a minus sign, so you might worry that it becomes negative. In fact, since you integrate on the difference between two probabilities, you can show that in some cases it's actually positive, and it has been studied in details. For instance, in the case where you are on Euclidean space. So on Euclidean space, if d is the Euclidean distance, you can show that this is a valid kernel. And actually, it's a very well-known kernel because it's the kernel that you find also in a negative Sobolev space. So for those who do PDE, if you look at the dual space, if you solve a PDE, you might want to look also at the dual, which is a space, if you want, of distribution. And in this case, you find exactly this formula, which is a very, very well-known formula, which you can view as a limit, large temperature limit of a properly renormalized, if you want, Schrödinger problem. And the way I like to think about this is this temperature is a way to interpolate between two very different quantities. One is not a norm, it's a Wasserstein distance, and it's kind of a very peculiar object. And on the other side, you converge to a Euclidean norm, Euclidean simplest norm in some sense, which is flat space, much simpler. And this raises a lot of mathematical questions we have known so far. So I really hope people will like my talk also, because there's more open questions than solution, is to understand really what's happening in between. What are the space we are defining in between? What are their properties? And are they good, better, worse? And for now, we don't have a much theoretical answer. I would skip this. Okay, this is mathematical property of this distance, which we prove, for instance, in some cases that it's positive. I want to spend some time on this slide because for me it's something really important. It's what happened in high dimension. And to tell you the truth, we don't know exactly what's happened in detail. Something that we can study first is the discretization error you make in high dimension. And this is very important because in practice, you never have access directly to alpha and beta. You have access to some discretized version, which in machine learning, you could just think of being just random samples from alpha and beta. So you do random samples and you build the empirical distribution. And then you ask the question on average, what is the error you make? What is how far is the empirical distance from the true distance? And the answer for optimal transport is very bad because the error you make is enormous. It's 1/n to the power 1/d. Okay, and something that has been studied in detail, and it's very well known that in high dimension, the error you make because of quantization of rounding if you want the points becomes huge. Because if d is even 10, this 1/n to the power 1/d is typically enormous. So optimal transport, unless you have other hypotheses to use to leverage, like this is not possible. Even if the densities alpha and beta are uniform, let's say on cube, if nobody tells you before you are watching at cubes, you don't know what happened, you just look at points. From the computation of the Wasserstein distance, you could never tell they comes from cubes because this error would be enormous. Simply to state that we have been able to refine a little bit this bound, specifically if alpha is different from beta, we show that this was actually not sharp, and the sharp bound is 1/n to the power 2 divided by 2, d, sorry, which of course is better by a factor 2, but it's still very bad. Okay, but we were happy to refine a bit the bound. Any mathematician that can refine a bond, but okay, it's pretty useless still. Now at the other end of the spectrum is what happened with Euclidean norm. With Euclidean norm, kernel norms, it's much better. It's exactly the same as Monte Carlo method. So Euclidean norm is simply a sum discretizing an integral. So it's really the error you make comes from Monte Carlo approximation of integrals. And now the error you make is 1/√n. So if you don't look at the constant in the big O, which we always do, we put on the carpet all the nasty details, you have some things that converge independently of the dimension. Well, of course, it's not optimal transport, so it's different. But it says that Euclidean norm, they can be computed in high dimension. And obviously, you will ask the question, what happened with this Sinkhorn or let's say Schrödinger version of optimal transport? And the answer, as might be expected, and we proved it with Eugen Weil and Francis Bach, is that you interpolate between the two regimes. Okay. As soon as epsilon is strictly positive, you have a decay of the error that is independent of the dimension, but no free lunch. The constant then will explode with the dimension. Okay. So there's no free lunch. Of course, as epsilon goes to smaller and smaller, you recover the problem you have with optimal transport. Okay. And it's pretty much the only thing we know. We only know that this quantity can be estimated, but we don't really know if it's better or not. Now we could apply this in practice. So what people would do in machine learning is then throw this new quantity in some random problem that they like. And the type of problem they enjoy is typically fitting neural networks. Okay? You want to fit a neural networks to generate a probability distribution. And this is typically a problem of density fittings. Okay? You want to fit some parametric distribution alpha to your observed set of points. I won't do a course on the way statistician would do this, but the natural way to look at this problem is through maximum likelihood, by maximizing the likelihood of observing the points, which is more or less similar to minimizing the relative entropies between the model and the observation. So this is a canonical method that works great for many models, but that would not really work in high dimension. Why? So what will happen? The typical way people would use this type of method in deep learning, for instance, is not to write down the equation for the model, because the model is too complicated, alpha theta is too complicated. They would rather write an algorithm that draw random samples from alpha. And the way you do this is you draw points in low dimension, in what we call latent space, and then you use the deep networks, G, that would send this point from the low dimensional space to the high dimensional space. So the distribution alpha is typically very singular, very irregular on some kind of a surface, if you want, in high dimension. And of course, if you do this type of methodology, it will not work with the maximum likelihood because you'll have zeros everywhere. You have log of zeros everywhere. So the maximum likelihood is typically not defined. And this is why, well, you can try to use what I've told you before. You replace the maximum likelihood by this Sinkhorn function, okay, or optimal transport with a little bit of entropy. Okay, so this now gives an optimization problems where you minimize over theta, which is a parameter, which is typically your deep network, this quantity, which is of course, not so simple to compute. So you see, you are building more and more complex things all together. It's just to scare you. If you don't know about deep learning, I think it's not today that you would learn about it. But let's say that deep networks could be either trained to predict basically the class of images. It's a classical way people would train a deep network. Here, in this type of problem, generative networks, we do this a little bit different because we start from a low-dimensional space. So Z here is a variable in a low-dimensional space, and we somehow place the networks backwards. So we use these deep networks to create new images. Okay. So in some sense, now the problems become, how do you train a network starting from low-dimensional random points that creates images that looks like the image you have in your data set. Okay, this is very, very important problems nowadays in machine learning, one of the fundamental problems, which is the unsupervised learning. You just observe collection of images and you'd like to train your network. Okay, I think I'm a bit late, so I won't describe how you do really this in practice. For those who want to know, typically the type of algorithms that are used are stochastic gradient descent, kind of traditional optimization method, where each iteration you generate random images. You look at what is your error you make, and then you compute the gradient of this function. Compute that is the Wasserstein distance between your random images and the image you have in your data set, and you try to improve the quality of your networks by doing the gradient descent. Okay, and this is just to scare you. The typical diagram of the computational flow you see is quite complicated because you have a random network. I don't know if you see on the left here, you have your generative model, your network here that generate random images. Okay, so the xi are generated at random. And then you compute the cost matrix between the random images and the image on your data set. You compute then the Gibbs kernel. And then you apply synchron algorithm, which is not yet another iterative algorithm. And this defines for you the loss that you want to minimize. Okay, you want to generate images that looks as close as possible from the images in your data set according to the synchron cost. Okay, but you can do this. You can implement this on the GPU, and you can use deep learning libraries like PyTorch or TensorFlow to minimize this type of function, which are very non-convex. So there is no mathematical, I mean, up to now, there is no mathematical proof that it really converges to a distance solution. It's really, for now, mostly black magic. Okay, so these are examples that you would have if you train this network on simple images, very simple binary digits. So in this case, it works great, but there's many other methods that works great. What is more impressive, and I want to conclude on this, is that it still works if you apply this to very complicated images, but it still works up to some details that is not so much of a detail, I think, is optimal transport. I've told you it works. I mean, you need some notion of cost, of distance, d of xy. And for natural images, if you use the Euclidean distance, it's going to be a disaster because the Euclidean distance is not really a good distance between natural images. And we don't really know what should be this distance d of xy. So what people are doing in machine learning, which is really something that works amazingly well, and we don't really know why, is they also learn another network. So they learn actually two networks, one for the generation of basically the fake images, and one for the cost, to define the costs. And they do this somehow either iteratively during the algorithm, or they do this by solving a min-max problem. They want to train the best possible networks to minimize the Wasserstein distance. But at the same time, they try to learn another network that do the opposite, that try to discriminate the fake images from the true images. And I mean, one of the leading figures of this field is Ian Goodfellow, who created this type of method, which are called generative adversarial networks, or GAN, which are very popular, and they really correspond to somehow trying to learn two networks together. And as you might guess, it's even more complicated because now you don't only minimize over networks, you minimize over one network and maximize over the other. All right, this is typical type of animation that you get when you have trained networks. You can look at some, for instance, interpolation between two images, and you get this beautiful animation that probably you've seen before. I mean, it's quite popular nowadays in the medias, and okay, it suggests that something interesting happening, but it's still out of reach from mathematics. So as a conclusion, I think I'm very excited, as you might guess, by all the opportunity to apply optimal transport to this new field. And I think this is also in the other direction. I think the type of problem you see in high dimension suggest new mathematical question and new mathematical theories that don't still exist to understand, I mean, what are the performance of this type of method, even in high dimension. And you see, it's not so simple because in high dimension, there's a lot of intriguing phenomena. One of the questions is also metric learning. How do you learn the metric you do for optimal transport? Because in all these machine learning applications, usually you don't exactly know what should be the cost to you. So it requires you also to try to think about this question. And also something even more complicated, I would say, is sometimes the data set don't even belong to the same metric space. If you do a language and the two languages are different, they belong to two different space, and you'd like to deal with it. And there are some methods that can do this, but they are still very costly and still very complicated to analyze. And I'll stop here. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer, of course.